Alright, so for the next topic, that is the gut-brain axis, the food-mood connection, by Ms. Pariksha Rao, I would like to call upon the chairpersons. We have Dr. Afsar Fatima, consultant endocrinologist at Bangalore Baptist Hospital, along with Dr. Kiran Nidagundi, consultant physician and diabetologist at Shubhan Diabetes Center, Bengaluru. He is also the EC member of KRSSDI. So a warm welcome on stage to both our chairpersons.
Dr. Kiran Nidagundi.
Okay, I think we can move ahead. Ma'am, could you please introduce the speaker?
Good afternoon, everyone. After that sumptuous lunch, we are ready to gather for a gut, endocrine, and neuroendocrine session. So, for this talk, I would call upon a very eminent clinical nutritionist, entrepreneur, and director of nutrition and medical affairs at the Good Bug. Oh, I've heard a lot about Good Bug. Pariksha Rao, please come on the stage.
Thank you so much for a kind introduction. So today's topic, I think we all can correlate personally as well as for our patients. Half of the time we said that before getting onto the stage I have butterflies in my stomach, or understanding that before an exam we feel nervous and we are not able to eat our food properly. So that gut-brain connection is what we will dive into today. And please have the presentation. No, that's not the presentation. Gut-brain axis. So till the time we are having the presentation, any of the cases that you could think where you were not able to control blood sugar even after you're doing every possible therapy, every line of lifestyle modification, still the patient's blood sugar or health is not coming under control. That's where we correlate gut-brain axis. So some of the cases I'm sure you'll be able to recollect from the clinic. One of the cases that I just saw was a mother whose daughter just moved to US, and the doctor of course was trying everything from an insulin perspective to diet perspective to lifestyle, and her sugar levels were not coming in control at all. After sitting down for 45 minutes, understanding that the child has moved to US, where the lady is not able to connect with the child, the cortisol increased, and the entire anxiety that the lady was feeling, the blood sugars were not in control, and that's the gut-brain connection, just an example. So we'll just quickly dive in. Thank you for bringing the presentation up to me. So we already know, like I said, gut wrenching, butterflies in the stomach, and a gut feeling. These are not just the words, they are scientifically backed now. So I'll quickly dive deep into the science, the evidence, how we eat today and how it impacts, and how do we personalize for each and every individual. What is the gut-brain axis? We can definitely understand the science behind it, a diagnosis that you would have seen in your system as well. The bidirectional approach that you see on the screen is the gut and microbiome network. Top-down, brain sets motility, secretion, and permeability. Bottom-up, vagus, hormones, immune, and microbial signals. The enteric nervous system, the 500 million neurons, the second brain, it's called second brain for a reason. And it's a conversation. So this highway has a two-way communication that's happening in our body, and that's the most important highway today we are going to dive into. So the entire metabolic organ, which was forgotten for a long time, now is gaining the right traction. 100 trillion microbial cells in the gut, 3+ million microbial genes, 500 to 1000 basic species, and it weighs about 1 to 2 kgs. So we are half microbial cells and half human cells. That itself sets the tone that we need to pay attention to this entire microbial ecosystem that is living amongst us. The four-way communication channel is very important to consider, be it neural from vagus and enteric nervous system, the endocrine channel, which is the HPA axis and the gut hormones, the immune through cytokines and entire immune response through the mucosal immunity, and metabolic, which is short chain chain fatty acids, the neurotransmitters, and the tryptophan. One trigger, like I was giving an example from my case, the stressor of the entire anxiety that we feel emotionally, which makes us human, as well as the diet. These two are the most important triggers that we can understand, which impacts this gut-brain axis the most. The vagus nerve, the superhighway that I was talking about, it's a fast, direct line between the gut and the brainstem. 80% of the fibers of a vagus nerve are afferent. That means it's receiving communication and signals that reach the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. So anything that's happening in our gut is reaching our brain much faster than what's reaching from brain down to the gut. So whatever food we are eating, the entire cortisol dump that's happening, and for women the estrobolome dump that's happening, impacts our mood. And that's where we half of the time hear the words like hormonal, the response was not the human, it was a hormonal response. So, but there is a very, very strict correlation between these two terms. And the necessary conduit for gut and the brain signaling. So idea is to understand what we are eating is modifying or modulating our gut to a level that the bacteria that's feeding the fibers, the end metabolite that gets produced can be the good one like butyrate, propionates and indoles. If it goes towards the proteolytic ones, that's where the problem begins, and that's where our thinking process, our behavior and mood can change, and that's the whole food-mood connection. The stress, the HPA axis and the gut. Leading from stress to high cortisol, the intestinal permeability gets compromised, leading to altered motility and dysbiosis. So when in our patients we see altered motility, gut motility, we think that it's only constipation, it's only coming from poor eating habits, but there is deeper problem that's already setting in. The mind, brain as well as the body connection is getting disrupted. The microbiome calibrates the stress response, and in germ-free animals overreact, colonize normally, and there are many studies to back it up now. We have seen that stress, a person who's staying in stress state for very long time, we see the dysbiosis moving to more pathogenic bacteria, and that's where the research started happening, that how the entire ecosystem of these trillions of cells changes with our anxiousness, our stress, and they are feeding into each other. The neurotransmitters made in the gut, 90 to 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, we know that. Bacteria make or modulate dopamine, GABA and more. So, like I said, a person, when we categorize a personality, 50 to 80% is controlled by what dysbiosis or eubiosis you have in your gut, and now it has been correlated. There is no causal relationship established as yet. The science is very, very new, but the correlations are now being noted. Serotonin does not cross the blood-brain barrier, so we understand the entire tryptophan intake from a dietary tryptophan, and that's why you would see good dietitians or some people who are trying to deal with sleep apnea and sleep issues. They try and put some high-protein food at the dinner time. That is to take care of your tryptophan. So tryptophan is taking care of the melatonin production. Serotonin to melatonin production is good, and natural melatonin can support the entire response. We were talking about tryptophan. So like I mentioned, 5% serotonin and melatonin, most of it in the kynurenine pathways. Some will produce microbial indoles, which are the barrier support. So there has been a lot of research around that the people who eat the right type of fiber, and that fiber can be very different for different people, but majority if we are feeding on prebiotic fibers, the amount of protein in our diet, the threonine component, amino acid component is taking care of the gut integrity and the barrier, the tight junction proteins are protected. So that's the difference that we start seeing. And then there is a mechanistic bridge from inflammation and depression. So very early signs of gut inflammatory markers with the end metabolites on the eating pattern have been observed. And when it triggers gut motility and dysbiosis issues, chronic ones lead to inflammation, and the leaky gut issues continue, and the anxiety and depression have been now reported. The good part of metabolites that I was talking about, the short chain fatty acids. So fiber is the signal. So entire army that controls the vagus nerve response from gut to brain and brain to gut is the fiber, majority. And this bacteria fermenting on fiber producing short chain fatty acids, we know a couple of them which we talk in our daily routine, but The metabolites are now at 7,300 metabolites that have been mapped that control the entire mood-food connection. But a lot of research is still required on long term and with a bigger sample size. We all know butyrate fuels the gut lining, strengthens the barrier. Propionate is our satiety signaling, and today I'm sure with a lot of GLP-1 talk happening, we have a lot of studies that say that natural or dietary protein and fiber is the predominant signal for a natural or a physiologic GLP-1 response along with propionate. So the fermenting fibers like partially hydrolyzed guar gum or the prebiotic fibers coming from artichokes, they definitely have an end product of propionate which helps in entire satiety signaling. And dietary fiber, like I said, becomes the biggest signal controlling the vagus nerve. The barrier integrity that we were talking about, controlling the inflammation, we all know that loosened LPS translocates leading to the gut integrity and inflammation, and increased interleukin 6, TNF, CRP. So these are robustly linked markers to depression, and there have been studies, I'll be talking about SMILES trial, where we saw that the moment these markers start to reduce, the depression also starts to reduce, which has been correlated to fiber, protein and macropolyphenols intake. The dietary patterns that shape the axis, the Western pattern as well as the Mediterranean pattern. When I talk about the Mediterranean pattern, there is an Indian pattern that we have identified that works wonders. So people in India who have been consuming seasonal fruits and vegetables more, like from jamuns to purple anthocyanins to indoles coming from cauliflowers, broccoli, brassica family and all that, have lower set of depression. And if you remember, if we take 50 years back, the depression per se started when the ultra-processed food consumption started. So there is a very good study which correlates increased consumption of ultra-processed food and the rates of depression, because the fiber and protein got stripped from our diets. So there is a clear connection between food, gut and brain. The SMILES trial, their diet was the treatment which was checked against a control. So 12-week single-blind RCT done with an adjuvant to the usual care. It was a very pragmatic randomized controlled trial done. 67 participants, moderate to severe depression, and they had a very, very poor baseline diet. 7 dietitian visits with the Mediterranean style of eating, and they were trying to understand where and how we can counsel these people to improve their dietary pattern with regards to protein and fiber and complex carbohydrates with colorful fruits and vegetables. So there was remission of 32.3%, you can see in the graph itself, and on the social support group there was hardly 8% reduction in the depression risk. So the dose response was more dietary improvement, and that's where the entire deep dive into microbiome and genomics started, and that's where even I started looking at nutrigenomics as a field where you can modify a person's risk to depression or even prevent and treat depression. So the caveats, of course, like we say that research, we need long-term research, we need bigger sample size to reproduce these results, but whatever I see in my patients on a day-to-day basis, this works. Probiotics, prebiotics and mood, and there is a word we all are aware of, psychobiotics. These are the food products which are live bacteria which work on our brain health. So these are the psychobiotics, and these are very well defined today in our grandma's kitchen, from kefir to kanjis that we prepare from ragi, or our beetroot kanjis that we have seen in our kitchen. And today on the modern science side of the things, you will find polyphenol extract, citrus bioflavonoids and ashwagandha leading to psychobiotics as well. Here the question is not genus specific, that I can't say that lactobacillus itself is a psychobiotic. Particular strains are studied for having a psychobiotic effect, and I think as doctors or people who are writing to support their patients, we need to understand the studies are done on a specific strain. So you will see lactobacillus or LRGG N191. So that is the strain that matters, where the studies have established and we have seen reversals as well as reduction in depression rates. And on the other side, if you are trying to understand for blood sugar regulation or for diarrhea, there is a specific strain that we need to go after rather than the full family, because it doesn't work that way. Fiber fermenters, like I said, I'm a big fan, of course. So fermented India's kitchen long back. I think it's time that we bring them back. All your grandma's practices of kanjis, fermented curd rice, overnight curd rice, all that needs to come back, and that's where the thing changes for us. So there has been massive data on how galacto-oligosaccharides have prevented dementia, have prevented, not treated. Of course, we don't have any causal relationship so far. So we have seen waking cortisol reductions. We have seen attention shift from anxiety patients from threat to safety. Psychobiotic diet, which can be very, very rich in polyphenols, colorful fruits and vegetables, and a good prebiotic fiber, has also shown reduction in perceived stress scores by 32%. Fermented foods reduced 19 inflammatory proteins, including IL-6, and then we can understand the entire inflammatory cascade that begins from there. Before the first bite, I really think we need to bring the practice of sitting peacefully in front and enjoying our meal. I think what our grandparents taught us to be filled with gratitude when the food comes, there is a science behind it. So when we are sitting with a plate in front of us and we are thankful, we are trying to say a prayer or we are humming, the vagus nerve gets activated. When vagus nerves get activated, your body or your stomach is prepared to receive food. And that practice itself has shown me 28% reduction in IBS symptoms. Just one change in practice, not change in lifestyle, nothing else. But I think we all need to practice mindfulness eating so that we can experience these results. So, like I said, the pause and the gratitude, the science behind is very simple. There is a parasympathetic shift, vagal tone gets better and reduces inflammation. The mindful eating, there is a better glycemic control, and there is a lot of RCTs that are backing up the science as well. So slow, savored eating primes the cephalic phase when the food is being received, and your satiety signaling can also get triggered. All this has been now linked with what is there on your plate first. Second, definitely the way you approach the food and the feeling of mindfulness. Nutrigenomics, the entire science that is backed by our grandmother's practices and your doctor's rooms, now that we are trying to correlate how the entire nutrition can become epinutrients and modify the way your body can respond. So there are trials that we are doing that if a person who is a quick responder to caffeine and who metabolizes caffeine very fast can have a cardiometabolic issue. But a person, when we modify their microbiome or modify the entire reception of that caffeine, we can delay that risk. So that's the whole part where we are studying about genome, the microbiome, the diet, and the metabolome. So the end metabolites are very, very important, and some examples are there on the screen. So from mechanism to the consultation, we need to screen the diet quality, and the exchange system in your rooms remains the same. The dietitians practicing with you remains the same. The recommendation pattern is the very important one today, not the pills, not the fiber pills, I would say, but the diversity, the diet diversity on the plate. So 30 plants and vegetables on your plate per week, but I think what I now believe in is that every day we can include 30 varieties and spices and herbs, everything is accounted for. And the Western prescription is very different because they eat 3 major food groups. We Indians have spices to herbs to butter to all kind of food groups on our plate, and I think 30 in a day is a definite possibility, and I see quite a bit of response on that. So how do we eat that? How do we incorporate that is fairly simple. Coming back to home cooking rather than ordering, I know very difficult, but wherever we can try, we can try, and position adjunctively. So mindful eating, psychobiotics, and the prebiotic fiber. All fiber is not prebiotic fiber. We have all been understanding that yes, there is soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, but the class of prebiotic fiber like galacto-oligosaccharides, human milk oligosaccharides, colostrum, inulin, fructo-oligosaccharides, these are the ones that give the entire landscape to this genome to feed on and produce the right metabolite for us to remain mentally and physically healthy and set honest expectations. So, of course, like I said, the science is new. A lot of deep work is happening around us. So much of the mechanism and the studies are mostly in the rodent models and now being replicated into human models. And the leaky gut aspect is very, very promising. And of course, once we maintain the leaky gut, we prevent the leaky gut by maintaining the barrier integrity. I think we see quite a bit of response on the blood markers that can be correlated to inflammation. So, just the few key takeaways from my side. Gut feeling, it's literal. The axis is bidirectional and multi diet reshapes the microbiome. There are no two ways about it. And the studies that we are doing now have been very clearly correlated that within 24 hours, the diet is the only variable that modifies your gut. So when you travel internationally, why do you feel that you are backed up or the intestinal motility is slowed down? Nothing has changed physiologically, but the microbiome has shifted to the food with the place that you have shifted to. So water intake to increase when you travel from city to city or internationally, and that's where the microbiome shift happens. So why in diarrhea, when we put somebody on a very simple mono diet of khichdi or with boiled vegetables, why that shift happens and why the gut maintains the entire consistency of the stool is because the microbiome shift that we see with mono diet. So that's the way we can understand the power of nutrition when it comes to modifying the gut-brain axis. Strongest evidence, whole dietary patterns, psychobiotics, we have modest data, and strain specific, like I said, is quite correlational, and we see quite a bit of response when we go after a strain rather than a whole genus or a family and try and provide a psychobiotic. So please look for the studies where the specific strains are taken care of. How you eat matters, response is very, very individual and personalized, and we need to respect cultural beliefs and try and bring the traditional fermented foods back into the Indian palate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Pariksha, for that wonderful talk. Any questions? Yeah, we all know that GIT, according to us, is one of the major endocrine organ. It's not just the organs surrounding it, it's the cells, the GIT cells, and also there's a huge amount of microbial organisms also producing a lot of, like what you showed, your enzymes. That is why when I gone through the literature while reading probiotics, in the last 100 years, whatever research has done, the last 10 years showed at least 50 times more research going on probiotics now. So we are heading towards that era where we look at the microbial particles or microorganisms or whatever we can improve from the gut level, what you said. So I think that should be the future, I think, like a preventive thing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Any questions at all?
It's a comment, very well said, and not only that the mood affects the gut, but gut is the second brain. We see a complex neuronal functioning at the gut, and also your stress and your all reactions are reflected there. So at times we don't give much emphasis to that, but patients are right every time they ask क्या खाना है क्या नहीं खाना है, how to go about, but doctor doesn't have much time and doesn't give that. But rightly you are told that the old practice of fermented food that we have almost forgetting, and somewhat in our generation it's maintained, but we'll go to the next generation, it's still horrible. It's all from the Zomato and the Swiggy and what they eat and how it goes. So you have to, it's right time we have to take this, the food and mood. Nice talk. Thank you.
So much.
Anyone else?
How to increase our protein intake for doctors in the night? Because our South Indian diet is almost 70%, 60 to 70% carbs. So just tips for the doctors.
I really appreciate that you asked that question. Thank you
Doctors,
so much.
because they don't have time, maybe, ma'am, and which is easier to prepare, I think.
Absolutely. The simplest thing is if you're not lactose intolerant, a glass of milk. Like I said, the entire serotonin production from glass of milk because of the tryptophan coming in is the perfect thing, and that again goes back to a grandma's practice. If you are lactose intolerant, the chena, the paneer made out of it, which has lesser lactose percentage, and take a full fat milk. I know there will be questions and eyes coming here. Full fat milk chena has a higher fatty acid profile, which actually passes slowly through your gut and reduces the symptom that any lactose intolerant can have. So anytime I have a lactose sensitive, I always give them a full fat milk chena or paneer that is made at home, and you just need the 30 grams of it. So 2 cubes is good 7 grams of protein for you, and you can sleep better. So, and on the other side, try and keep some roasted chana at your desks, whenever in between patients, if you can try that, that will be good. Because I know your routine, I've sat with some of you and I know how much it goes in taking care of your patients. I think please don't run away from a good whey protein powder, which is absolutely clean, or if you can bring, like I said, the sattu mix that we make at home traditionally, it can be prepared. So what I do for my family, I will take 5 dals, I will mix, I will dry roast, I will add some fenugreek seeds into it, some star anise into it for the functional properties. I keep that powder ready. You can mix it with water, you can mix it with milk. So depending on your structure. So 2 of such incorporations to supplement your protein intake can give you a little boost there itself. Yes. Can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to say great talk. The question I had as a primary care physician is there's a lot of talk about how there's a link between the gut-brain axis and neuropsychiatric disorders. So you have Alzheimer's, you have Parkinson's, you've even got depression. So do you find yourself as a nutritionist advising, I mean, has your advice changed for these patients because of all of this?
Yes.
And how?
Okay, like I said, when we study nutrigenetics, we try and correlate first a genetic variability with the SNP that can be there in this person's, genetic profile. When we find out, I was showing you that there is an MTHFR modification, or if I'm talking about HLA gene presentation or things like that. Especially for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, there is now data that vitamin D supplementation reduced the symptoms and improved the quality of life. You know, there is nothing which is remission, right? There is nothing. Can we halt that progression? And vitamin D and omega-3 are now the front runners in the entire program. So my entire focus goes on what this person is eating and digesting, and the entire gut-brain axis that I was talking to you about. The biggest problem that at least the patients that I see have, they tell me not to reduce their symptoms, to help them have a better bowel movement. So the correlation that I see is so strong that the moment you increase fiber, water, and the perception towards the food, and once they have a better bowel habits throughout the day, I see quite a bit of improvement in quality of life. Once you replenish their omega-3 stores, once you take care of their vitamin D and folic acid scores, I see at least 10 to 12% who have reported to me on improvements in quality of life. Of course, scanning and rescanning in India doesn't happen, so I can't talk about the tissue changes and things like that. But yes, these are the 3 main things that I keep in mind.
Yeah, Pariksha, it was really nice talk. Just wanted to know more about, you heard of something called as a poop transplant and something?
Yes, sir.
What it is, how it is, and how it's going to really help out the patients, and is it something going to help out for the gut microbiota or something like that?
So fecal medical transplant is right now only approved for one condition in the world, which is C. diff, diarrheal infection, just one. Because then the second studies which started happening on Crohn's disease and like that, they started taking healthy patients and started taking the fecal sample and started transplanting into the others. The interesting part that came out that the healthy donor had a mental health issue. And that mental health issue got transplanted to the Crohn's disease patient, and that's why the entire research was kept on hold. And that's where it became, and the new rule came into ethics committee that no fecal medical transplant will be approved until we have more data. C. diff, because it's such a chronic thing and not even a single antibiotic is able to provide support, only in that condition it has been approved. A lot of study, a lot of data is needed. So yes, that's where we are. But I find quite a bit of scope in that. Hopefully we'll be able to get there in, I don't know how many years, but hopefully soon.
Okay, so if there are no questions, thank you for that wonderful session. We'll wind up for the next talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone.